not only did I make the mistake of doing a feature film as my first film, as opposed to what
Mm.
you're told to do, and that is make a short film first, I also made the toughest kind of film in the world to make, and it's called a first person documentary.
Hello, my name is Hobart, and I very much enjoyed this conversation with Jonathan Holiff, the director of the film My Father and the Man in Black. It's a documentary about his father, Saul, who was a longtime manager of Johnny Cash, and I truly believe that he was the reason behind their success together. I learned a lot about Johnny Cash while researching this topic, but surprisingly, I learned a little bit about it myself as well. What was your experience in Hollywood before you found the storage locker?
Sure. Well, actually, I got my start in Toronto at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC. I worked in live television, specializing in award shows and music specials. I worked on the NHL awards for many years. And in 1991, the host of the NHL awards was Alan Thicke. You might remember him as the star of Growing Pains.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in Hollywood, obviously. And he invited me to come work for him in Los Angeles for the last season of Growing Pains. And that eventually led to dual Canadian American citizenship and work in television on both sides of the border.
When your father had killed himself, you came across a storage locker with a surprising amount of memorabilia from Johnny Cash. What was that experience like?
Right. I was still in California at the time when the phone rang, and it was my mother telling me that my father had ended his life. And he and I had been estranged for many years at that point. The occasional note in a letter, but no phone calls, no real visits, very sparse. And it really, was a gut punch. I wasn't prepared for it. And what really troubled me at the time was learning that he, purposely committed suicide, but didn't leave his sons a note. And so that was unfinished business. And speaking of business, I had a business at that point doing celebrity endorsements in Hollywood. And I basically sold it to my partners and headed for Canada to look in on my mom and just kind of decompress and think things over. And that was when she told me about this storage locker. Saul had kept a storage locker for many years. People do that. It wasn't a secret, and it wasn't, to hide anything. It was just where he kept the things that, would clutter the house. So
Yeah,
it was a
exactly.
locker. And my mother told me about it, gave me the keys, and asked me to clean it out. And because I knew that would mean, going through whatever was inside, and I wasn't really ready to face my father's death at that particular time, I just let it sit. And it was wintertime in Canada, and a new movie happened to be out in theaters called Walk the Line. And of course, I went to see the movie. And while I was watching the movie, I realized really for the first time that Johnny Cash was famously arrested the year I was born. And I started to think maybe I had been too hard on my father. Shit was going down, and maybe I needed to understand him better if I could. So I literally went straight from the movie theater at night to a storage locker in winter. So it was very cold inside. And I found what appeared to be just a bunch of dusty old banker's boxes with files in them, an old vacuum cleaner, an old reel to reel tape deck, and other odds and ends. And when I started to open the boxes, that were just marked cash, it's not like they had any dates on them.
Hmm.
It turned out to be basically everything that he kept from his years managing Johnny Cash that he felt was important for one reason or another. So it was an emotional experience and a real surprise. It was kind of like a gold mine when you consider that behind the boxes, I found gold records, including the gold records for Folsom Prison, Ring of Fire, and really quite uniquely, the gold 45 for A Boy Named Sue.
Yeah, I saw that in the documentary. That was actually really neat. He had a lot of them.
Yeah, Jonathan, in the music business, um, the manager also gets a gold record when the artist does.
I used to think that only the manager did, and then the artist, like, I don't know, earned it, I guess, but
I'll,
I,
I'll
I
tell you
always thought the
something
manager
else
had it.
too. I'll tell you something else too. In those days, they were actually dipped in gold. They were gold leaf. So, you know, they were Uh, they didn't stand up great to time. These were really well taken care of. They were in a box and the frames were still intact, but they're not like the bulletproof plastic encased things you see today.
Hmm. How long did it take you to go through everything uh, before, I guess, being comfortable that you actually have a gist of everything that was there?
Yeah, well, that's there's a couple of answers to that question. It took 7 years to make the movie.
Hmm.
But before I even thought of making a movie, this was really a personal exploration on my part. I was trying to find a way uh, to make peace with my father and to see if there was anything in what these were important files that might have included his kids. Were my brother and I represented in the storage locker materials? The answer is no. The family photos and things like that would be found later in my mother's care.
Mm.
But before I could even, and again, I'm not a writer. In fact, my mother saw me writing notes one day. I didn't want to bring the material home at that point because my mother had just lost her husband and I didn't want to unbox the past right in front of her on her living room floor. But she found some notes I had made and she said, you should write a book. And I said, but mom, I'm not a writer. And so what I was really doing was I didn't realize it at the time, but I was writing in the sense that the first thing you have to do, particularly when it comes to documentaries, is you have to organize the story. And as I said earlier, there weren't exactly dates on everything or, big red arrows pointing to the X that marks the spot about what's really important and how it fits in with all of the other stuff. So the first 2 years I spent literally, and I did finally unbox the stuff at my mother's home, on the floor in 5 different rooms and just started making piles. And then I put everything into a database and reference scanned all of the material. And that's all part of the process in trying to organize the story elements to, see what structure emerges. Um, but as I said, it took 7 years from beginning to end to deliver the film.
I understand. I remember in the documentary, you had seemed to have found a contact list of your dad, and you were going through it. How many people did you try calling on that? Did that take a long time itself?
Yeah, and that's basically documentary filmmaking 101. You want to do as many interviews as you can with people who were, in the room. Um, However, it's important to note that this film was unusual for a documentary in the sense that we didn't have any talking heads. If you remember seeing the film, this isn't your typical, talking head Ken Burns documentary.
Yeah, which I actually I want to interrupt. I'm sorry. I very much enjoyed that. I have
Oh,
pet peeves on documentaries. I really enjoyed your creativity, and it was almost as if you're watching a movie more than it is watching a documentary. And I really enjoyed that aspect of how you did it.
well, thank you very much. I really wanted it to feel like a movie, not because I thought it was necessarily worth being a movie, but
Hmm.
because, well, for example, I shot 35 millimeter film.
Yeah.
Uh, and the reason I did that, and remember, this was 10 years ago, and the Red camera had just been in Toronto for about a year. And I used, much to my regret, overused what they call dramatic recreations. Now,
Mhm.
remember, this is without sound. We're not talking about actors delivering lines on camera, but actors pantomiming the action in certain cases under Saul or Johnny's voices. And I thought, if I use video, it'll look like an episode of America's Most Wanted. And I didn't want that canned video, back 10 years ago, barely full HD look with no kind of depth of field or film grain to it.
Mm.
So I, like a naive and stupid first time filmmaker, um, insisted on shooting film.
It's really funny. You say that first time filmmaker. It was. I'm sure it was very expensive to find the film as well. This is an outdated industry. Does Hollywood still shoot in film today?
Well, they do, but it's funny because not very much, and very, very rarely. But at the time we went into production, Kodak was going out of business, which was good
Mhm.
news for me because I still had my place in LA, and I was shooting the film in Toronto, but I was in LA for whatever reason at the time. And I was able to, pitch Kodak in donating the film for the movie, and had to basically put it in the trunk and drive it to Canada.
I back to that contact list. You're saying it's 101. In making a documentary. That's actually what people were doing for you before you found the storage unit. When after your father passed, you kept getting calls asking, like, "Hey, is there anything there? Do you know anything?" and everything. So that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah,
You
that's
actually live. You were on both ends of that during this.
and that's part of the reason why um, I thought this could be a feature documentary. Remember, um, I didn't. This is before I went through the material.
Hmm.
All I could really remember about growing up with Johnny Cash were the memories of a child, and I knew the main bullet points of what my dad was doing for Johnny, but I didn't know the details. So at the time, the first question I asked myself was, who would care about this
Hmm.
story? Who cares about the guy behind the guy? And then the phone started ringing. And the reason why the phone started ringing was because a guy in London, Ontario, my hometown, wrote an article for the newspaper that basically had the headline, Saul Holiff deserves role in Walk the Line. And the takeaway message was, how can they make a movie about Johnny Cash and not talk about Saul Holiff? And people all across Canada saw the story, clipped it out. This is 10 years ago, remember,
Hmm.
people were, still using snail mail,
Hmm.
and they were mailing them copies to my mother, saying, did you see this? And if not, check this out. And so I was, surprised, and it fueled me even more, of course, to understand why um, this article would have been written. And after that, we started getting calls from book writers, authors doing books on Cash, who wanted to go through the material. And indeed, a couple of them actually traveled all the way to Vancouver Island and spent several days with me going through the material.
When you found all this material, were there family members coming out of the woodwork? Like when deaths happen in my family, we don't have much, in the terms of inheritance. So it seems that we handle it really well. Everybody is really good at, like we all give each other what we each think we need. Nobody fights over anything. Did anybody end up fighting over this material when you were trying to make it into a documentary?
No, not at all. Like I said, I was still wondering if it was worth enough to uh, be put in a movie, let alone whether it had any kind of value
Mm-hmm.
as memorabilia. Now, obviously, I'm not stupid. I worked in Hollywood for a long time. I probably asked myself at one point, gee, I wonder how much that gold record is worth.
Mm-hmm.
But to elaborate, uh, my family is very small. In fact, my last name, Holiff, is the only family in the world with that name. That's how small the family is. So there was none of that kind of thing.
Okay, that's great. I'm really glad to hear that. How many family members were involved in the making of the documentary?
Well, just about all of them, because it's such a small family. So we're not talking about a lot of people, but with the exception of a couple of cousins who, had just left for their winter, in Miami, because a lot of Canadian snowbirds winter in Florida.
Mm,
Uh,
hmm.
every relative who lived anywhere near Toronto was involved in the movie, and some of them on camera.
That's great. I remember you giving credit to your co-director. I for the life of me, I had it memorized, and I can't remember which family member was your co-director.
Oh, I didn't have a co-director. I think you're talking about one of the producers, and
Okay, yes, yes.
I'm glad you brought him up. This movie would not have been made had it not been for my cousin Jeff Paikin, who lives in Burlington, Ontario, and is a big shot in the real estate business. But he was visiting LA, and every time he visited, we got together, and I invited him to a party and at a friend's place in the Hollywood Hills, and we were outside at the pool. Talk about typical Hollywood story, and people were just chatting after most of the people had left for the night, and somebody asked me what I was doing, and so I started to talk about it, and my cousin said, "Hey, do you need any help?" So I really got lucky. Now, before you think I'm some rich kid enjoying all the benefits of nepotism, remember I was 10 years old when my dad retired. Nobody ever picked up the phone and said, you know, give this kid a job or a job interview. And, I didn't even think about talking to my cousin, the real estate guy, about a documentary, but as luck would have it, he made it happen.
I like that you say that. You're not a rich guy. People might, I'm sure people have assumed that since since you're the son of Saul, that you had a kickstart in life, or that the reason you have what you have is because you're the son. And I don't agree with that. Even let's say good credit. I've got a friend who their parents, raised them with a credit card, and he had a good credit at 18, but now he's in his 30s and he still has great credit. You can't really give all the credit to the parent because he had all that chance to mess it up this entire time.
Right.
And
Listen, I should just add a postscript to that, though, and I thank you for saying that. I was a rich kid. My father was very wealthy. He wasn't Johnny Cash's employee, he was Johnny Cash's partner. And
mm,
he made millions of dollars. And he retired when he was 49 years old and never worked again. And then he spent all the money on himself.
mhm.
So, I definitely was had a privileged childhood. There's no question about that.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about how your dad kind of retired early and then went off to do his education and everything. But really, I think he did enough work in that decade and a half with Johnny Cash to earn that retirement time.
Yeah, you know
Uh,
what, Jonathan? There's a famous line in Raiders of the Lost Ark that Harrison Ford came up with. It's not the years, it's the mileage. And
yes.
that could be said about Johnny Cash and working with Johnny Cash for the 1960s and early 70s. So
Yeah.
yeah, it did take a lot out of him. And you know what it's like with addiction. The person with the issue isn't the only person that is affected. It affects, of course, primarily Johnny's family, his kids, but also the people who work around him.
Hmm.
And you know, the arrests and the scandals and 1965 just blew my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people word it as if a drug addict is a victim of addiction, but I don't think that they're the victim because it's self-induced. I believe the victims are actually the ones trying to help the one going through the addiction, because oftentimes the people that make it through addictions are oftentimes people that don't need it. I've quit. I like as a young adult, I've done bad drugs. I won't list them off, but it's been 13, 15 years. I didn't even remember it. Like I couldn't even remember the life at this point. Like, so it's gone. But by now I've quit cigarettes and even sugar at some point. And those were those two were the hardest. But
That that makes you more accomplished than me. So I'm happy for you.
yeah, I appreciated that in addiction wise, at least, I'll say. But I've never needed the help. Like, I've never gone to NA. I've never gone to rehab. I think the people that actually quit are the people that are able to do it by themselves, which doesn't create so many victims. Sorry, I love My Father and the Man in Black. I love it because it tells the story in a different sense. In that way, it really is describing the actual victims of the story behind the Man in Black. And I'm so impressed with your father in the sense that I said it last interview in a realization. I didn't even know much of the story, but I remember realizing that your father was really the reason for Johnny Black's success in general. Sorry, Johnny Cash. And I think at first I was calling him a businessman, but I think he was really, you could tell by his slogan, he was a salesman. And I know a couple like really good salesmen. It's a type of personality. And I think he had it.
Well, thank you for that. And you know, you're right. It's important to point out, I think, that you know, talent managers in the 1960s were very different from talent managers today. They not only produced often the concerts themselves, but they always traveled with their artist. And in addition to putting Johnny Cash with June Carter, Saul is credited with convincing Cash to switch producers, which then allowed Columbia to bless the live recording at Folsom Prison. He talked Johnny into San Quentin after Johnny followed up the Monster Folsom record with all original songs about Jesus. And finally, probably his dogged, single minded pursuit of getting Johnny his own television show.
Of all the content in the locker, how much of it made it into the documentary?
Well, certainly not all of it.
Yeah.
Just to give you a simple answer, the DVD, and just for you guys out there in the audience, it used to be a round disc that people put in a machine to watch movies, has 20 minutes of deleted scenes. And that's just the stuff that I thought I could get in but couldn't, rather than the stuff I just left out because I didn't think it would make it in. So there's a huge amount of material.
I love buying the actual DVD. I actually bought this on YouTube so that I could listen to it at work. So I bought the documentary on YouTube because I have YouTube Red, so I can actually close the screen and have my headphones in. And that's where I do most of my research. Is I paint industrially, so I don't have to think while I work. So I get to learn chemistry and physics and everything while I'm at work. I'm really enjoying that. But
Fantastic.
I really like getting hard copy DVDs for the exact reason I like watching commentary almost more than I like the movie. I watch the movie and then watch commentary and deleted scenes. Like I love that part about it. And it really saddens me in the whole Netflix era, where you really miss out on a lot in that.
I'm totally with you there.
Where is the archive located now?
Well, in 2016, my family and I donated all of the material to the University of Victoria, which you mentioned earlier that my father retired at 50 to go back to school because he had dropped out of school in grade 9 in the middle of the Great Depression to, get jobs to help feed his family. And then he enlisted in the Air Force. So he never did get an education, and that's what he was after. And he graduated with an honors BA in history from UVic in 1983. And the university always held a special place in his heart. And so we donated everything to UVic. And in 2018, they launched the Saul Holiff Archives.
That's really cool. I love that your dad went back to education. And in fact, it's so odd, my journey like in the educational aspect, because I dropped out of high school when I was in ninth grade. I've always been learning though. I've always had like the knack to, go to Google and learn. And now I belong to a website called brilliant.org, which is pretty much an online school. And I'm quote unquote self-educating at the moment, and I'm loving every minute of it. My mind is bright, it's fast. I'm better in conversation. I'm better at reading and spelling. Like so many things are improving, and I'm sticking mostly with math, which is, I think, the reason why I'm feeling so much, improvement.
Well, you and Saul have that in common.
In the process of making the documentary, could you briefly describe, like, from script to final edit, like the
Sure.
major processes?
Sure. The caveat being that I was just learning these things then. I may sound like an expert now, but it was all new to me. But there is one truism when it comes to the difference between a narrative, like a Hollywood drama or whatever, and a documentary. They both, generally follow the usual 3-act structure. But unlike a narrative where, most of the effort is in principal photography, the writing of a documentary and the shaping of the story really happens in the edit. So I talked earlier about the 2 years it took me to organize the material, to reference scan everything into a database, outline treatments. I hasten to add, by the way, Jonathan, that my first treatment, or, what we used to call a one sheet, which is basically just the log line, the synopsis, and then a long synopsis, I sent to a couple of friends of mine for feedback, including a dear friend in LA and a very successful screenwriter named Donald Martin. And he wrote me back and he said, this is all good, but you need to write this movie from your point of view, and you need to put the suicide at the top. I had it at the end. I was thinking very linear. He was born here, he managed Johnny Cash here, he died there. At that particular juncture, I was just still learning, even though I had spent, 15 years as a producer type in television. This was my first time writing and directing. And worst of all, not only did I make the mistake of doing a feature film as my first film, as opposed to what you're told to do, and that is make a short film first, I also made the toughest kind of film in the world to make. And it's called a first person documentary. In other words, I'm telling the story. And I didn't want to be on camera, and I didn't think anybody would care to listen to my problems and spend, $15 and on popcorn and movie tickets to do it. But he convinced me that that was where the heart of the story lay. And so basically it went from outline to screenplay to, tons of edits. But again, getting back to the whole idea that the story and the film is shaped in the edit suite, the edit took 2 years. Principal photography was like 12 days. The edit took 2 years. And so that was the process.
Yeah. And so like you're saying, this is a little different because you don't really know exactly how everything's going to structure out. So did you get did you kind of get the main idea before you started filming the cutscenes, or did you have to film the cutscenes as you were figuring out the whole thing?
Oh no, I had a completely locked screenplay.
Oh,
Um,
good. Oh, cool. Okay.
you need that before expose film, as they used to say, or what do they say now? Roll tape or
Yeah.
roll your computer chip.
Yeah. You gotta
But
start recording. Yeah.
on the one hand, I did it the hard way, like I mentioned before. Shooting film, dramatic recreations, sound stages, location, you know, night for day, day for night, wet downs, the whole thing. But it was actually a terrifically joyous and fun, and everybody just really gelled on the actual principal photography. And I thought at that point, God, I love directing. This is my favorite thing in the world. And by the way, I should add that I had the great advantage of not recording sound. So, when you're shooting on location and when you're shooting on a sound stage and you don't have to record sound, it makes things, orders of magnitude easier.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there was this screenplay, but in the edit, I realized it didn't work in terms of the chronology of the story. So that was a huge problem. And also, I ended up with a rough cut that was close to 3 hours long, and I was aiming for 90 minutes.
So when I asked this, how involved were you? Obviously you were there the whole time during the process, but like how many jobs did you take during the making of it? Were you editor, filmer,
Well,
everything?
this is the other mistake I made, and that I'm not making on my new film, and that is I did do everything. Now, I don't mean to say everything at the at to discount the incredible work of a team that numbered over 100 employees at one point. But I was producer, director, writer, production accountant, publicist. Um, I mean, I did way, way too much.
Yeah. I'm sure you did a lot of the business aspect too,
Yeah,
promoting. Yeah.
raising the money and having to figure out, the tax credits and all of the
Oh yeah.
machinations of film and television production.
Hmm. What part of the process was most difficult to get through, in your opinion?
Well, that would have been the edit. And I remember what I was going to say earlier. I mentioned that I absolutely love shooting the film, and I decided, gee, I want to be a director for the rest of my life, to actually falling more in love with editing. I mean, it was so hard. It was the hardest part. It was grueling. I was drinking like a fish, and I was gaining weight, and I didn't look good, and I didn't sound good. I was already pretty much that way by the time we, were shooting in those scenes in the movie. I've got a gut on me that I never had before, and never since. But the editing was just so creative. I really hadn't realized not only what an art form it is and how creative and rewarding it is, but also, again, that serendipity. I can't tell you how many times I was able, with my editor, to cover a mistake or to make something work just with the materials we had, because we didn't have the money to go back for reshoots or to,
Mhm.
for costly mistakes. We had to live with it and figure it out. So
How much in depth did you have to understand every job, even if you hired somebody else to do it? Are there some jobs where you completely have no idea what was going on and you absolutely had to trust, or did you understand almost everything going on?
I'm smiling, and because that's such a great question. And um, a lot of Hollywood types don't tell you the truth. They want you to think it's some big mystery, and you have to be a rocket scientist. So I'll tell you the straight dope. On the one hand, it is true that in getting my first film made, I had to learn a ton of shit. I did a lot of reading, watched a lot of videos, met a lot of people, attended a lot of workshops, and whatever, and you know, attended the markets. By markets, I mean there are certain film festivals in North America that also have markets as part of the event, where you go and you pitch buyers and so on and so forth. So I studied up on everything. But the funny thing is, when I yelled action on the set that first day, I didn't have a clue what everybody was really supposed to do. And the funny thing is that um, they know it too. There's, you know, every business you're in, that people are in, there's a certain culture that grows up around that business. And uh, what the culture around making movies in, say, a soundstage, is that the director is treated like the president of the United States.
Mhm.
Like, suddenly people are opening doors for you. They're yelling quiet on the set. They're saying, make way whenever you want to walk to another set, or, the bathroom or whatever. So they're there to basically make what your vision happen. Now, I got really lucky, and I say lucky because I'm not that smart. And, my personality probably rubs most people the wrong way. But I did one thing that seemed to just, and I didn't do it really on purpose, but I did one thing that just turned the key. And that is, the first day we were on the soundstage, we'd already done, I don't know, 4 or 5 days of location shooting, the car to car stuff, the exteriors, that kind of stuff. But the first day on the soundstage with the entire crew, there's a wardrobe department, carpentry, the whole works. Before we even did our first setup, I asked that we gather the troops in the studio, and I basically reintroduced myself. And I said, this might be a little unusual for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a first person story. And so this is about me and my dad. And the other thing is, I've never done this before. But the one thing I did that really turned them on, and I didn't do it to turn them on, but I mentioned we did not record sound.
Mm.
And so the way that I paced the shooting of those scenes, because as you know, Jonathan, they're under, a phone call between Johnny and Saul, or Saul talking into his audio diary late at night, drinking scotch, whatever it was. I played back the audio on the stage, just
Hmm.
so that, for pacing reasons. So I thought I should play them some of the audio before we even start shooting, so they get an idea about the story.
Yep,
And
yep.
so, they're listening to Johnny Cash in 1972 on the phone with my dad, and they're going, hey, this is not just another Lifetime movie of the week. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so they had a vested interest all of a sudden. I didn't do it for that reason. I wasn't trying to win friends and influence people. I was trying to tell them, this is what we're trying to do. But the audio really captured their hearts and their motivations.
At any point of the process of making this documentary, did you feel that there was a moment where it wasn't going to happen? Like, even like halfway through the production, where you're just like, wow, it's just not working out. I don't know how it's going to finish.
Well, the short answer is every other day. Um, but less so, when we got to principal photography. You never believe that it's going to happen, or at least I didn't believe most of the time that it would happen until we were, on the set. I kept thinking someone would come in with a hook and drag me off the stage. But mostly, in the years leading up to principal photography, raising the money and writing the script and learning the process and, figuring things out every other day, I thought, I need a job with an income, I need to get a freaking job.
When I was watching your documentary, the photos in that was really impressive.
Thank you.
How you rendered them to 3D.
Yeah, some people call them treatments. They're visual effects as opposed to special effects, which are done in camera or VFX. And so you're referring to photos where, Johnny's in a black and white photo from the 1960s, but looks like he's about to strum his guitar because his arm moves slightly, or Saul is smoking a cigarette and you can see the smoke rising from the cigarette. I stole all those ideas from an award-winning documentary that really turned me on, that I saw while I was preparing to make that film, called The Kid Stays in the Picture. I highly recommend it. It's about a famous dude who ran Paramount Studios. And it was the first documentary, as far as I know, that really went all in with that kind of thing. That isn't Ken Burns. Ken Burns is all about static pictures that the camera moves over, and often those pictures aren't even, fixed, or what we used to call, airbrushed or whatever it used to be. But that being said, yeah, you cut that. Now today, everybody can do it on their desktop.
Yeah.
10 years ago, it was still new. That work is farmed out, in this case, to a company in Toronto called 601, that's run by three young guys, two brothers and a buddy of theirs, and they are responsible for all of those treatments in the movie, and they did a fantastic job.
I completely, and it was all over the movie too. They didn't just do one or four. There must have been something like 30 to 50
Yeah, to
photos
be
they
honest
did.
with you, Jonathan, there were too many, and that's my advice to you. If you're going to do it sparingly.
Okay. For one cost, but I don't know if it was a distraction. I wouldn't. I loved it. I'm glad. I'll add that fan moment there.
Cheers, man.
Did you consider this a form of therapy for you because you were just going through a really rough and confusing time, changing your career, and almost your entire life changed during that time?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that's how it started, right? It was not going to be a book or a movie. It was just me in a storage locker in the middle of winter after my father killed himself, trying to figure it all out. So yeah, it was a form of therapy. And obviously, well, if it's not obvious, the whole process was very cathartic. I was able to find empathy for my father, and that led to forgiveness.
So you really experienced the hero's journey through that whole thing, like the Hollywood hero journey there.
Well, it's thank you for saying that, but that's the thing, even if it's a documentary, you're still kind of hewing to that hero's journey, which is, where the Bible comes from.
Yeah, and pretty much every story that means something, at least.
Right.
And the cool thing is, going through these audio files and everything, that was actually your dad's form of his own therapy. Was I assume recording these all of this and keeping the book that you found called Life, which is like a scrapbook of everything that he felt valuable, at least.
Right. We're talking about a 1960s archetypical man. Back in those days, it was taboo to visit a psychiatrist. And so he did kind of do therapy, although I don't know if he realized what he was doing or what the effect might have. But he was a guy who liked to keep records, and it's a good thing he did, or there wouldn't have been any movie. But at the end of the day, what I found, and the reason I was able to find that empathy for my father is because when I was growing up, he was a hard man. He wasn't a touchy-feely kind of guy. He said on tape that at one point that if it all happened over again, he wouldn't have children. That was hard to hear. But what I learned for the first time in meeting my father before he was my father, this is a guy speaking into a microphone at age 40, and I'm the same age, I was the same age, hearing it for the first time, was to meet your parents before they were your parents and to find out for the first time that my father did have an emotional life. He did register all these things that were going on that I thought he was oblivious to and didn't care. Meanwhile, he was a tortured soul who was just trying to figure things out like all of us.
Do you find yourself keeping things in sentimental reasons in the same sense that your dad did?
I wouldn't use the word sentimental because I don't think I've got a lot of that. I don't think Saul, well, yeah, no, I don't think Saul had a lot of that either. I think it comes from another place, personality traits, people who, might go into law or become an accountant, people who are organized and, balance their checkbook are the types that, keep things, right? But it's interesting you ask. I always was that way. I had a successful business in Los Angeles, but it wasn't until I became a documentary filmmaker that I really started to do it without really realizing, what was going on. Just to be specific, after the movie, that led to a book, and the book led to a university archive. And the university archive led to a nationally televised tribute to my dad on television. And through it all, I have been, keeping his story organized and adding to it as these things happen and learning new things and realizing belatedly that something I thought was meaningless, like a moose hunt in Newfoundland, turns out to be probably the most important story of all.
So yeah, let's go into that. What is your current project now?
Well, this moose story, it's kind of like a fishing story in a sense that it's this big. I knew about the moose hunt. We're talking about the 1961 Newfoundland moose hunt and concert tour. I knew about it because that was where my father and Johnny Cash shook hands on being Johnny's manager. They had been working together for a couple of years. Saul was producing Cash shows in Canada since 1958, but Johnny tapped Saul to be his manager in October 1961. His career had faltered. Elvis had crossed over to popular audiences. Cash had not. He hadn't charted really in any serious way for 2 years. And he wanted Saul to be his manager. And they, talked about it for weeks. And while they talked about it, Saul thought that he could impress Johnny by setting up this tour in Newfoundland because he knew Johnny liked to hunt. And so they show up in Newfoundland, and we're talking about a cast of country and Western royalty. Merle Travis, let's see, who else? Rose Maddox, Johnny Western. And it's a fantastic story. And it's what led to Saul calling June Carter, because when he agreed to manage Johnny, he had his own conditions. Johnny had just gotten a drummer at that point. Saul was always complaining, how can you be serious and not have a drummer? When he started with Johnny, it was Johnny Cash and the Tennessee Two. And so when Johnny asked him to manage him, Saul basically said, look, I want to put you on big stages, like Carnegie Hall and the Hollywood Bowl. At the time, he was playing clubs and, high school gymnasiums and shit like that. And Saul said, we need a bigger show. We need more than just you and your band. And so he hired Rose Maddox. And I'll let you guys look up who Rose Maddox was, but she was a great. But she quit in the middle of the tour in Newfoundland, saying that the boys were just too wild for her. And that's what led 2 weeks later to Johnny and June and Ring of Fire and all the way to Folsom Prison and beyond.
It was a very dangerous situation up there on the Newfoundland tour. Cash, of course, was taking pills and had to leave the show for a while. It was a situation where his voice was just giving out. They asked me to do that final spot on the show. I was recording for Columbia Records at that time, and the second highest rated television show in the world was Have Gun Will Travel. They told me that I was playing to 350 million people a week with that theme song of that show. So the people in the audience were familiar with me for that particular thing. Working with Johnny, I usually introduced him in all the shows. So we had an extremely close relationship, and he always felt that I could jump in if necessary. That made it very easy for me to do the fill-in for Johnny when he was not able to perform on those days. In fact, some of the pictures that I have seen of that particular tour of the Moose Hunt, shot from behind with the back of the stage and then looking at the audience, it is me at the microphone.
Harry Walters was the director of wildlife when he called me and asked me if I would be interested in guiding Johnny Cash. I was in Millertown doing research on moose. They picked me up at Lake Ambrose and we proceeded to the camp. We stayed in a logging camp that had closed for the season. The first thing I remember in the morning was Merle Travis asking us to get out of the sleeping bags and enjoy his coffee. Merle Travis was the gem of the crew. He was witty, always had a joke, sang a lot of his songs. Luther was one in a million. You didn't know if he was a millionaire or a bum. Luther was Luther. Wherever he went, he was loved. Not well liked, he was loved. What I remember so well about Gordon Terry was that he was a very beautiful singer. I can't remember ever hearing anyone that I thought was better. And he loved to sing. And my thoughts was that this guy is really going to go to the top. But I learned after that he was famous as a violin player.
All aboard with that 4-5 girls, that ain't right. Ain't right. I don't sparkle like a pool of pearls, that ain't right. Ain't right. All the girls are real cute tricks, that ain't right. Ain't right. Everybody but me are getting their kicks, that ain't right. Ain't right. It ain't right. It ain't right. It ain't right.
Saul Holiff was a very highly respected guy, really, because we knew he was Johnny Cash's manager. He was a great guy to be with, always had time to talk to you, and played his part in washing dishes too. But Johnny Cash and I was the same age, 29, I believe. We almost became immediately friends because everything we talked about, we both had a common ground into it. It was a dream of a lifetime too, when I think of it. I remember so much about it simply because I enjoyed every moment of it.
How did you come across this content, the story, and why didn't it make it into the original documentary?
That's a great question. Like I said, I knew about the trip because the first thing I ever had to do in order to make a film like this or any documentary was I had to basically develop a calendar. That's a simple way of saying a database organizing all of the material chronologically and with keywords and everything else. And I saw that moose hunt on the list, and I had the approximate dates, and I knew it was about 10 days long. And there are letters where Saul and Johnny are talking about the moose hunt, going to Newfoundland. They had a big meeting. Johnny wanted Saul to renegotiate his deal at Columbia Records in New York City, which they did literally the day before they left for Newfoundland. And so I knew about it, but the reason it didn't make it in the film is because it's a film, and if you don't have pictures, it's not really going to rise to the top of the material you're working with. And I didn't really understand the importance of the story at that time. In fact, I didn't even know all those people were on that tour, including and especially Johnny's longtime friend and my dad's friend, Johnny Western, who is one of our primary contributors in the new film. And he's got the dope, he brings the receipts, and it's just fascinating. Oh, and sorry, I didn't answer your question. Why now? Well, last summer, someone in Newfoundland, a fan, discovered 30 new photographs of the hunt. And they're not just new and they're not just beautiful, but it turns out, we found out a little later, they were taken by a famous Life magazine photographer known for his spreads on Clark Gable and John F. Kennedy.
Do you have a lot of people trying to reach out to you, giving you more information? Does this situation happen often these days?
No. And, it came as a complete surprise. I've often thought about making another film. Part of that, there's all sorts of variables, obviously, but part of that is the main part of that is the idea for a film. And, I have started work on a bunch of ideas that just didn't cut it. And if you had asked me if I'd make another film about Johnny Cash, I would have said, heavens no. So it was a huge surprise. This fan had heard about me or read about me online. And he basically just called me up and said, here, do something with these. And it was basically like, winning the lottery in in a storyteller sense, because without those photos, and, in the final 90 minutes, those photos, there are 30 by the famous Richard Dick Frisky, and there are 17 candid ones, also new, from Johnny's hunting guide, Heman Whalen. But then you have all of my dad's archive at the university. So in the final 90 minutes, there's going to be hundreds of photos. But these photos are key, obviously. And if they weren't so good, I don't think I would have even thought of making another film.
This was really the start of Johnny Western's story with them, wasn't it? This particular story?
For the first couple of years, it was just Johnny, Marshall Grant, and Luther Perkins. And then some promoter like my dad must have told them, look, we need a few more characters on this in the cast. And so Johnny added Johnny Western and Gordon Terry. And so there were, and then Fluke came aboard in 62. So there were like six of them by the time Johnny tapped Saul to manage him. And that's when Saul hired Rose Maddox. And because of that weird moose hunt, turned around and replaced her with June Carter.
When can we expect the release of this new documentary?
Well, it's just getting started at this point, so I can't say for sure, but I have reason to believe that we're talking fall 2022.
Okay. Uh, I guess since you're still in the project for this might be a hard question to ask, but after this, what's next for you in your career? Are you planning on going back to Hollywood, or do you think you're gonna try to do more filmmaking on your own?
You know, I don't know. And I was about to say something and will say something that's terribly uncharacteristic of me, but you know, I didn't see this coming. So, something might just come along as a consequence of this.
No.
Maybe now with a second film, somebody will actually say, you would be good to direct this for somebody else. You never know. But I have no plans except hoping someday to retire. And no, I'm not ever going back to Hollywood. And I wouldn't travel there, at least during the Trump administration either.
Right now, what's your favorite movie out right now? And it could be old, it could be at any moment. Like, I typically base my favorite movies on how many times I've watched it and enjoyed it. But
Oh
what would be
man,
yours?
if you're gonna go with that definition, my answer's pretty boring, and it would be on everybody's top 10 list. Shawshank Redemption.
That's a good one. That's a really good one. Um, what movie were you most impressed with while watching, either visual or factual, or like just it took you out of your reality? What movie? What I guess that would be probably the same movie in this. But what were you most impressed with?
Well, I think you're right about that. If you mean that, and remember, that depends on when you saw the movie, because my answer doesn't necessarily mean that it's more impressive than something I saw last week by Christopher Nolan. But to answer your question, the first thing I thought of again was that documentary, "The Kid Stays in the Picture." You should check it out.
Okay, cool. Definitely. I'll put a link. I'll put a that actual reference that in the description of this video as well.
Cheers.
On that note, I'm gonna actually put links to other interviews that you've had on this and other subjects that we like, other interviews that painted a light that I did not go into. I think that'd be valuable as well.
If you don't mind, I'd like to recommend one, and the reason I do this only because I just stumbled across it yesterday because YouTube, just automatically plays next video, and
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't seen this in 10 years, but I did an interview with BBC Radio, and it's on my YouTube page. So if you're going to do some links, that would be a good one to include.
Okay, cool. Okay, that's funny. It's obviously I asked that. I'm coming on to the end of it.
We can go back to Walk the Line or the first movie, whatever you want.
You know what? Walk the Line. Yeah, let's talk about that for a moment. I didn't like Walk the Line. Shouldn't say that. I enjoyed it, but like I only watched it once, and I never had a desire to keep watching it. I agree with Trevor. As when I saw Walk Hard, I saw that movie much more.
Oh
And so
yeah.
now, when I think of Walk the Line, it's really difficult for me to separate Walk Hard and Walk the Line. Now that I've researched more on Johnny Cash, it's a lot easier. But before this week, when I look back, I actually never really wanted to talk about it because I'd be embarrassed at referencing the wrong movie. But
Well, yeah, I'm not going to diss Walk the Line. I enjoyed it very much, but like you, I've seen Walk Hard many more times than Walk the Line. Having said that, it was very well made. It captured some of the Johnny and June magic. I am a huge fan of Joaquin Phoenix. Reese did a good job, but it wasn't really a stretch because she grew up in Tennessee idolizing June Carter. So, but she was very well cast. Let me put it that way. The director did a marvelous job. It's first class from beginning to end. But it's a movie. And in these kinds of interviews, I'm also asked, what did you think of the movie as a representation of the story. And, again, I'm not pretending to be smarter than I am. I really just and I worked in Hollywood for 10 years before I ever started thinking about these kinds of things. But let's remember, most of us, including me at that stage, go to movies and, we may see that disclaimer at the top of the film that says based on a true story.
Hmm.
It really should read based loosely on a true story. I mean,
Yeah,
let's
I think
remember, they're taking a whole entire life and compressing it in less than 2 hours. So, something's got to give. That's not a criticism. That's just the reality of, of you know, I'm not going to say fiction, but it was a narrative film. It wasn't nonfiction. It's not a documentary. And, different events were compressed together, and certain things were left out. And so, it was a great movie, and I couldn't have done better.
me neither. And in vocally, I sing, and I've got a lower toned voice, and I can get those low Johnny Cash notes. But I think Mr. Phoenix did a really good job on that, because I don't think he has that natural low voice, and I think he had to gain it, which I'm impressed with.
Yeah,
It's a lot easier to gain the highs than the lows.
plus he's a little guy. I mean, Johnny
Yeah,
was 6'2".
exactly. Yeah.
So, he really had that larger than life presence to him.
That pretty much wraps it up. I want to relate a little bit in the sense that in the religious aspect, in the relationship between your father and Johnny, me and my cousin Trevor, who was also in the last interview, we are partners in everything, in music production, and in this type thing as well. And we are very big into the community. We work together very, very well. But he is the most religious of anybody I know, and I am the absolute opposite. I think it's really funny if we were to keep text messages, like if we would have had letters like them. The funny thing is, he always ends it with "God bless you," and I'll always end it with "God's not real," or something along those lines. It's like it's an actual. We literally joke about it. It's not a big deal, but I relate
How
in
old
that.
are you, Jonathan?
I'm 33.
Okay, well, keep in mind that not only did religious people kill people like us, it wasn't that long ago. And remember that in 1973, when Johnny and Saul broke up, I don't think Saul ever even used the word atheist, even in private conversation at friends' parties, anything like that. It was, really on the down low. So, things are changing slowly. It's only taken 2,000 years to start realizing the earth is round.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I am for separation of church and planet.
So where can we find you on YouTube? Do you have a website? Where can we find you if we want to find anything any news or anything like that?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm that guy with only that name. So you're not going to have to worry about how many Holliffs to go through before you find me. And I'm on Facebook, YouTube. And if you're wondering about my first film, My Father, the Man in Black, you can find that everywhere, with the only exception being Netflix, ironically.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you joining me. This has been a pleasure researching you, and I've learned things about myself during this, and I really appreciate it. I had a great time with this interview. Be sure to watch the documentary My Father and the Man in Black. I recommend buying the DVD to get the bonus footage. I'm going to put links to interviews with Jonathan on other channels, a link to the recommended documentary The Kid Stays In, and a link to keep updated on the upcoming documentary When Johnny Got His Moose. This channel is new, so every like and every subscription makes a massive difference. So please consider liking and consider subscribing.